So go up to Tennessee. They have like quarter comics.
We have quarter bins and methamphetamines. If you do some meth, you can look for comics for a long time.
Jesus Christ! Oh my God!
For more than a century, comic books, television, and movies have existed. Each separate, broken, with their gatekeepers.
No!
Then, something happened that brought all media together. The internet brings comic fans around the world into one comic community. Put your hands together, comic fan. Comics are for everyone. It's 10 p.m. Eastern, live Comic Book Wednesday, a weekly YouTube show about comic books with Lady Fantastic. Comics on the Mind.
Get your hands up!
Miracle Man. Special guest appearances by Ace. And your host, Not Near Mint. Welcome to Not Near Mint.
So welcome to the show, everybody. It is episode 97. It is also Sunday, July the 11th. It's 10 p.m. Eastern Time, and there are 23 days remaining on writer Daniel KALBAN'S Kickstarter for American Dreams. This is for issues 4 and 5 of the ongoing series, and at this present moment, it is 3/5 funded, and tonight we have to tell you we got him. We have him. Daniel KALBAN, please welcome him to the show.
Hey guys,
Hi, Daniel. How are you doing tonight, buddy?
really good. It's a little humid over here in New York, but I'm good.
Thank you so much for joining us. You know, I don't want to take away. I just have to say real quick. You said a little humid. I don't want to take away from you because I'm sure it's miserable in the city. Mr. Worst, Miami area. So you know, heat and gross all the time. Look at those comics. It's amazing that they're not all just totally waterlogged garbage at this point. But anyway,
seen them in boxes. Kidding. Why do you think that the name of the show is what it is? Welcome everybody to Not Near Mint. Now you know. So down below we have a couple of those comic books, and do you want to tell us a little bit about the project that you're working on?
Right. So American Dreams is set in 1900 here in New York. A young Jewish immigrant gets superpowers from a Thomas Edison experiment, which goes horribly awry, and now he has to decide what to do with them. And he ends up meeting with historical figures for both good and ill, and they will ultimately affect him. They'll affect the history of the United States, and we'll see how it goes. And issues 4 and 5 are our big season 1 kind of 2-part finale.
nice. Yeah,
So these are
I
both coming out at the same time, 4 and 5?
Because we did 3 last year, 4 was ready to go, and then there was some delays with my old publisher, and then they went. So, and I had 5 ready just as they went. So I thought, let's do both, and give everyone and have the whole arc done and ready to get into people's hands. So those comics are done. They're completely done. Drawn, inked, lettered, colored, covers.
Nice.
So right now, this is just to recoup costs and help it keep it going as an ongoing series.
Basically, yeah. And print costs and various other little expenditures that come up.
So the powers that are bestowed by Thomas Edison's experiment that went apparently completely and horribly, utterly wrong. J.P. Morgan shows up, Tesla. You wind up having Harry Houdini showing up in the book. What made you do the research, and what kind of research went into 1900s, turn of the century, New York City, and just what went into that? How did you go about it, and what was the approach?
So the original impetus for the book, I was literally daydreaming, in my room, and I had the original cast recording of Ragtime on my listening to it at the Orchestral Street. Now, if you haven't heard the show Ragtime or you haven't read the original book, it's set in 1906 and deals with the periods of that time period and whatnot. And I thought to myself, what if superheroes were in that time period and the light bulb went off? So, I knew which figures I wanted originally to start. I knew the time period, and I'm from New York, so I know some of the history. Wikipedia does help a bit, but I go back and check their sources, to make sure that's kosher. And I actually got from a old former coworker a biography on Houdini, so that helped because my former coworker for a time was president for the Society of Magicians.
Wow, that's an interesting pedigree right there.
Yeah, and he ended up working for the Con Edison Workers Union.
Wow.
But yeah, so I did a lot of research, and originally there was a cover drawn by Doty. Really, we were at the 2 publishers before now, and he drew a car. I'm like, Doty, I don't think they had cars in 1900, so he had drew in a wagon. And of course, I found out later not only there were cars in 1900, there's pictures of Houdini driving.
Yeah.
I had to learn that from Downton Abbey when I noticed that one of the lead characters of this show, I won't say which for spoilers, but they wind up killing one of the main sisters that are on the show by car. Turn of the century. Oh, yeah, I guess I just spoiled that.
Oh, wow. Yeah, and the best thing about those cars is, they were all steel, and they weren't designed to save the soft occupant on the inside.
No airbag. Most didn't even have steering wheels on the outset.
And you'll see actually in issue 4 that Jake, our main character, doesn't take very well to cars.
No.
Can fly very fast, can run very fast. Driving in a basically a Model T, no thank you.
Yeah, there's reasons with Ford why perhaps the Jewish community may have some issues there.
Oh, we hate him. He's horrible.
Yeah.
He received an iron
He drives a Ford. That's kind of the point. He drives a Ford, but that's because they're union made.
Right.
Just today.
Yeah. But like in issue 3, there's a scene where Houdini is, giving a whole, flourishing, and now next to Jewish Hercules. But in the original drawing, Doty, my artist, my penciler, drew a microphone, like a 1930s circular. And I'm like, I don't think they had any microphones like that or microphones in general. They did have microphones, but like little things like this big. They weren't very good. So they wouldn't have been used. This is the age where theaters used to do natural projection with your voice.
Sure.
Because there's no thing as even like a little mic back then for
They
acting.
look kind of like this. I have one over here that I use for my court reporting gig. They look a lot like this. Those old mics.
Yeah, this was like the old-fashioned like circular, like you see in like an old radio show.
Right. Yeah.
And so we had to turn that into a flourish. It's historical fiction. So you can twist things around a bit, especially when you start adding superheroes, but you still have to have some, idea of what was what back then. And Doty has to look up, and I help him find up old pictures of the era of how things should look. Which is great because we have a little teaser sting at the end of issue 5 for things that might come up next. And I actually had to look up the old Waldorf Astoria Hotel.
Oh.
Now, I work near the present-day Waldorf Astoria Hotel, which is a couple blocks away from my office. But that's not the original. The original is where the Empire State Building now sits.
Oh, really?
They tore out the old Waldorf Astoria back in the 30s, and they built the Empire State Building.
Ah.
Now, I'm going to drop in the chat for anybody that wants to check out the Kickstarter, and I will also, on top of that, bring that up as a shared screen so we can talk about some of the artwork that's in that. Now, both of your pencilers, Dodica, and your inker, I hope I'm pronouncing these right, Tabi Andri, they're both from Jakarta, and even Natho Diaz is from Indonesia. How did you come about finding your artist for this title?
I actually had a couple friends 2 publishers ago because originally I just presented the script as a pitch because originally a friend and I had been brought on to bring a couple superhero characters we co-owned into this other publisher's thing, and they were like, "Well, we're ready for this down. Do you have anything else?" I'm like, "Well, I have this couple ideas." I sent them out and like, "We like this modern Colossi script, but the title stinks. So you have to change the ending." Because the ending was a little more selfish and cynical of Jake at the end. It had the more contemplative ending in issue 1. And so I did that in Tales of American Dreams, and I had to find an artist. And my buddy, I had a friend named Nigel Flood, who has worked with Dodie. He's like, you should use Dodie, and Dodie recommended Tebby for the inks. And I believe Nigel also suggested Warnia for colors. And I forget who recommended Netho for the variant covers, but this is how, and the main cover issue 1, as it turned out. And somehow it's people that you know who they like, and they give you recommendations. And I've also been really fortunate to become friends with these people and give them constant work because gotta keep pointing out the found. And I mean, I've also gotten a chance to get some other art from some other people that I have to use. I'm thinking of using for the trade. Hopefully, I'll launch like later after this Kickstarter down the line. And I've been actually posting them on my Facebook, the black and white of one and the color of another. But as you see, here's one of our historical guest stars. That's the infamous anarchist Emma Goldman, who acts as a kind of, she's not standing on the side of liberty, but she's not on his bad side either, but she's kind of the one who pokes and prods him going, you should be doing this to help someone and not be, not just, be selfish with your gifts. And of course, our big villain, there's 3 main villains, but our biggest of them all is Aleister Crowley, who you're seeing as you're scrolling down. With another supporting character who we introduced in issue 1. I won't say who for those who have not read it. But like Dodie and I had to really go and research, how the tenements looked, how this looked, how that looked. And also another major historical character here is Nellie Bly. And she and Emma right next to each other on that 3rd row of that page. Nellie Bly, for those of you who don't know, was a famous reporter, most famous for basically getting herself locked up in a madhouse and reporting on the horrible conditions there. Thank you, Grant. Dodie's a great artist.
Yeah, I read the first 3 issues, guys. I genuinely really enjoyed them. I was saying to Daniel before the show backstage, there's something, just poetic about. First of all, we've got, how often do superheroes come out pre-Golden Age, right? It's all, everybody always shows up to fight the Nazis, and don't get me wrong, I love watching Nazis get punched in the face. I would literally pay any amount of money for a nonstop punch Nazis in the face comic book. Pay attention, everybody, and. So you love that, but this is before that, so it's putting us in a unique time period that we really don't have an opportunity to see in capes and tights comic books very often. And then on top of that, we add that little poetic flourish where the world's first superhero is a Jewish man, which is appropriate, seeing as how superheroes were by and large created by Jewish creators.
Yep.
And certainly the long-lasting characters, Superman, Batman, Captain America. Maybe
Yeah,
not Batman.
and of course,
Superman.
one of those creators actually has killed Nazis. Almost had to held back to punch one in the face out of the Marvel offices.
Yeah, oh yeah. As for longtime viewers of the show, you know my love of Jack Kirby, and if unfortunately Jack wasn't born until 1917, so this takes place before that. But if the book lasts long enough that you get to 1917, I hope we're going to see little Jacob Kurtzberg get born.
Like I was toying with that at one point. I'm like, when Jack Kirby, because Jack grew up on the Lower East Side, where Jake's from. I'm like, let's see, and like, oh no, he's not born until a year after my grandfather was.
Yeah.
Well, I'm reminded of a book that wound up winning the Pulitzer Prize. It's written by somebody that was very into comic books, Michael Chabon. He wrote a book called The Adventures of Cavalier and Clay.
I read it every year. I actually have it signed by him.
Oh,
it's
wow.
one of my favorite books of all time. And yeah, this was a book that back in the 1920s, early teens, this was how the Superman gets published. This is how these Jewish kids wind up getting their book published. And you see the publishing fields from Atlas, and I'm not talking Atlas Seaboard, I'm talking about the original national publications from the 30s and the 20s. And you're seeing reality as it was back in that era as breaking into the industry. And it's something that no one talks about in the industry. You don't know what that history was like in that era. And just to be able to see this published in a recent comic book in 2020 and 21, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, the sad thing is, of our, pretty much all the golden age talent has long since passed. I mean, there's documentaries where they're interviewed, but
right
after those interviews, and all the Silver Age people have unfortunately passed. So it's, a lot of that, oral history is unfortunately getting lost.
Yeah, because nobody really knows. There was no documentation back then. At least not by what our standards today.
Oh no, there's a whole thing there's this unauthorized biography of Superman, which is mainly like the unauthorized history of Superman. And you have to remember, DC at the time, which I think was in National, was then taken over from the Colonel Wheeler Neeson. Wheeler Neeson? I don't remember. It was basically taken over by these two Jewish wise guys who, liked cooking the books. Unfortunately, not the most exemplar members of the Jewish race.
There's crooked people of every nationality and race. To be fair,
I always liked what George Carlin said, that don't judge somebody based on their race, nationality, sex, or gender. Take the time to get to really know the person to find out what really makes them an asshole.
Oh, and if you read the story, if you read this book, the unauthorized document biography, these two were assholes to until they sold it to what would eventually be Warner Brothers.
Yeah. Well, there's the few stories you hear about the Golden Age, the creators' rights. Most of them aren't very good.
It's a horror show. Rick
Veitch did a very famous book called Maxi Mortal, which was essentially how Siegel and Schuster got screwed over by DC Comics.
Yeah.
And if you've never read Maxi Mortal, folks, I highly recommend it. Although I will warn you, there's a lot of poop in it.
Didn't Bob Kane, co-creator of Batman, and until fairly recently the sole creditor one, in part, screw Siegel Schuster over by saying, "Oh, we made this. I said this character was underage. You can't have this, be used in a court of law because you would all get in trouble."
Yeah. Yeah, he was not. Bob Kane is not a. People know the name, but he's not a great guy. He was not a great guy either. So,
as much as everyone's angry at Steranko having gone a little too crazy, we will always love him for the fact he punched Bob Kane out.
I got to give him that.
Thank you in perpetuity.
He does look like he's trying to relive the disco era. He's like Disco Grandpa. Have you seen him lately?
Oh, I saw my first ever Baltimore Comic Con. I took a break from my team to go get my Shield omnibus signed by him. And I went to take his picture, and I actually snuck it. But he's like, no photos unless I have 2 miles next to me. He was very 70s,
right?
that with sunglasses and everything.
Yeah. He never left them. The disco era ended, but he kept boogieing. Is basically what
He's like,
anyway.
he stepped out of Studio 54, which nowadays is a actual Broadway theater.
Right. Now it should be like Studio 81 because the dude is old as shit.
Actually, be 81.
Grab your drinks and your canes and hit the dance floor.
That's right.
You kids get off my lawn, but not before I break this crazy funky beat.
Yeah.
God, I need to just channel the elders of my people.
I was gonna say that did sound a little Jewish. I don't know if you realized it when you did it.
Really?
A little bit.
That was not my intention at all.
It didn't sound like one of my immediate, family members, but it sounded like the whole stereotypical Jewish.
It
I was
did.
just trying to sound like an old man. I wasn't assigning any kind of.
It sounded like you were doing. It sounded like you were doing a little Jackie Mason there. That's all.
It's kind of like how Mel Brooks in High Anxiety, the little Jewish old man to get through airport security with him and Monica meeting this old Jewish married couple that's constantly arguing as they're going for the metal detector as they're trying to escape San Francisco. Oh yeah, of course we have Mystery Men. Disco's not dead. Disco is life.
Right. Oh man, great movie. So, I wanted to ask you what are your comic book influences? What creators really speak to you and maybe influenced your work?
That's a good question because I always think of that. I'm trying to always figure it out. Scott Snyder, I think, is a big one because I'm a big fan of his. Probably a lot of the Silver Age writers I read growing up because my original comic collection was just my dad's old comics from when he was a kid. I think Batman the Animated Series and Superman the Animated Series is a big influence. So big shout out to Bruce Timm and Paul Dini. Probably some Grant Morrison in a weird way, though not. I don't go into the level of esoteric dive they can go into. Like they can write a comic and I need a Wikipedia entry just to figure out what is going on with these references. like his whole thing from his Batman run.
I wish that Wikipedia existed when I tried making an attempt at reading their Invisibles run. I couldn't do it. It's a lot.
That's a rough one.
I think it's a whole bunch of writers. I think because also probably a lot of theater writers that influenced me. Because like pre-pandemic, I went to a lot of theater because my dad could get discount tickets. So that's an influence. Probably a lot of, I just absorbed. So it's probably a whole menage of different things.
Yeah. All right. Well, those are some great influences. I'm a fan of Snyder's work myself. I will say this: your comics come across much more grounded than Silver Age books. So, if you were influenced by him, you took the right lessons. I'll say it that way.
Yeah, it's like you have the great heroics, but you still need to have one foot in, like Darwin Cooks, late Darwin Cooks. New Frontiers, the perfect age of Silver Age combination of Silver Age style and whimsy while still being grounded and real.
Right.
If you're referencing Darwin Cook in relation to your book, you've already won me over.
I mean, New Frontiers also 50 years ahead of this.
Oh, sure.
That's what Korean War into the Kennedy era, right?
Yeah, that's futuristic by comparison to this story.
Yeah, like this is more like this. Anything close to this would be more like steampunk.
Much closer to the Victorian era than it is to the Silver Age era.
Yeah, this is still the age of there's still carriages in New York City. There's still unpaved roads in New York City. There's still parts of Manhattan that are still relatively rural at this point.
There's still people throwing buckets of feces out of windows.
Probably 5 points, but yes.
Yeah.
Because 5 points. 5 points. If you haven't read the book, The Gangs of New York, or the movie, The Gangs of New York, 5 points, in history, it was tailored to the tail end of that. I still wanted to be this gritty, slum that even Charles Dickens went, okay, this is worse than London. And it's like 5 points is probably one of the worst places ever, and nowadays it's where all the courthouses are in New York City. It's like, basically clear the slums out and turn it into basically every courthouse because it's not that far from, like literally in back in 1900, you could literally go a couple blocks away from City Hall and one of the main courthouses, like the Tweed Courthouse, named after the infamous boss Tweed,
Right.
and you'd be in the 5 Points.
Yeah.
Which was not very good.
Right. Yeah, if as Daniel mentioned, if you haven't seen that movie, Gangs of New York, but that gives you a nice cool look. The character, what's his name plays there, Daniel Day-Lewis.
The Butcher, based off a real which is based off a real character who actually died before the actual movie version did.
Right. There's some things that are attributed to him that other characters did, but his character is based off a real guy, and it gives you an idea of the long-standing history of racism and bigotry in America, because the movie starts off with them throwing rocks at Irish immigrants as they get off the boat.
Yeah, it's also, and it's kind of touched upon in issues 4 and 5 American Dreams, because our big villain who calls himself Amalek, which means which is a term from the Bible for someone who actually wanted to kill a lot of my people. He is a descendant of German immigrants. Now, German immigrants looked down on Jewish and Italian immigrants of that era, but generation before that, the Irish immigrants were looking down on the Germans.
Yeah.
Before that, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant Anglo-Dutch community was looking down on the Irish.
Yep.
So it's like in every generation there was like, the next generation of immigrants comes in, they get dumped on, which is unfortunate.
Right. Yeah. And at the moment, our influx is Latino, so that's what's getting all the crap right now.
Yeah.
But we're so racist, we even hated other white people at one time, guys. They were just Catholic. So
this is a welcome to America moment. We are weak as human beings, and in order to feel stronger, we just have to fill in the blank to whatever minority group we can pick on to make ourselves feel better. Hey, look, it's the Irish this time at the turn of the century, 1900s.
Well, in this case, it was more pre-Civil War when the Irish was being persecuted. Now, it was really the first big wave of Eastern European, because there was also animosity in the Jewish community. Because if you were like a Western European German Jew, you look down on the Eastern European Jews from like Russia, Poland that were coming in this wave of migration.
Right. Yeah, because Eastern Europe is a big difference from Western Europe. It seems like it's all the same place here in America, but in reality, they're very different places.
And there's even apparently there's even a distinct difference between Eastern European Jews, and apparently you can tell by the way they prefer their gefilte fish.
Ah, okay.
And I forget what it's called, the gefilte fish line. Like one way you're this kind of Eastern European Jew. If you like it this way, you're an Eastern European Jew. It's like this diagonal line for Lithuania.
Gotcha.
I was going to like a kosher deli personally. I would order a corned beef on rye with mustard, a Crown style condition, a dark brown cream soda.
Oh, Doc Brown. I love Doc Brown.
So I saw that last cover there with the pink and purplish colored chains. That cover looks phenomenal. I love that.
That's probably my favorite one so far.
I originally did like a Halloween pinup idea I had randomly. I thought this is the first real blow by Crowley. Let's make it the cover.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And the next one, it looks like we have some of those historical figures on the cover with our hero. Yep.
I forget who's the one on our right behind Emma Goldman, but you go clockwise. I think it's supposed to be Crowley actually, but I'm not 100% sure.
Okay.
Emma Goldman, Harry Houdini, and J.P. Morgan.
There we go. J.P. Morgan. Yep. All right, now
that you can get. Oh, Kitty. Oh, and Kitty's gone.
That is an awesome shirt. Are they available only through the Kickstarter? Can you get them
for now? Because I don't have a website open yet. They're only available for the Kickstarter.
Okay.
I still have to work on that eventually post Kickstarter.
Nice, yeah.
And Jay Sloan did this. Well, it's Jay Sloan and my cover color is Tommy Shelton. Originally, it was a commission done as a reward from Jay Sloan's Kickstarter. I think for Operation Eclipse 2. And I asked him if we could do Liberty, and he sent me that. And I have the physical in one of my various portfolios, but turned into a pin-up, and I thought it would be a great little print to include as a bonus.
Very nice.
You won over Ace's heart.
We have to be careful with that. Speaking of heart, it's cholesterol.
Heart attack in a basket.
Yeah, basically. Like especially like it is not that many kosher delis left in New York, unfortunately. Like there's one not far from me down Cloud Island Avenue. Like the big one that's left is Second Avenue Deli, which is like the big one that's left in the Mendy's. And there's Cass's, which is technically not kosher because they mix meat with dairy and they're open on Saturdays.
Oh, jeez, no good, no good. I live in a rather large Jewish community myself, so I'm familiar with many of the rules, although I routinely get them wrong. So
I mean, I like a nice Reuben, but
Learning a
still.
lot right now.
Yeah, that's a part of the problem with New York, isn't it? You know, since the 80s, you know, the flair, the thing that makes New York New York has been slowly stripped away and replaced by corporatization and you know, homogenization.
Yeah, like unfortunately, because me, I was born in '89, so I was born just as they were starting the whole cleanup of Times Square and everything. So I don't know everything about the bad old days. Like my dad has stories of like the blackout of '77.
Yeah,
but like to me, you know, Times Square's always been Disney World.
right.
The second that they decided to change Hell's Kitchen into Mercy Park, that was the what is it called? The gentrification of New York City.
Right.
Yeah, it's I think it's called technically Clinton now, but everyone's still at Hell's Kitchen, but it's appropriate because Hell's Kitchen now is a restaurant run for all the theaters. So Hell's Kitchen's now lots of kitchens. It's like funny because everyone thinks Hell's Kitchen's like out of Daredevil. It's like it's not really at all. It's like you go to eat before a show.
This is dangerous. Maybe you might get, I don't know, a little bit of food poisoning.
That's the thing about Marvel. You know, when they started, their tagline was "the world outside outside your window," and now it's like the world outside your window in 1971.
Yeah, I mean, since you add superheroes into the mix, you're gonna alter, you know, things. Because we don't have like Four Freedoms Park like they have for Fantastic Four. We don't have like a giant Avengers Tower. Where they have Avengers Tower in the movie is, I believe, really the MetLife building in New York,
Right.
which just looms over Grand Central.
Right.
And like there's no Doctor Strange's mansion doesn't exist, unfortunately, on Bleecker Street.
I mean, to be fair, you wouldn't know if it did.
No, my dreams are over.
Bleecker Street.
It could be right there.
I don't think the exterior is. Do they use the exterior for something? But I don't think there's the actual. But the actual address, unfortunately, doesn't. It's like 221B Baker Street, basically. It's like you can fake the address in like another building, but it still technically wouldn't be the actual.
Right.
But it's really funny because I think where they position like the old Avengers Mansion was now like the Frick Collection, which is a massive museum owned, particularly by these 19th century, early 20th century industrialists.
All right.
Because they would loot, you know, all of your, bring it back, store them in their mansions, and turn them to museums after they die.
Right. Well, the privilege of being rich back then, right?
Yeah. It's like I was doing research for like Arc 3 of American Dreams and like, oh, the Metropolitan's just been built. Let's see how it looked like in 1900. Looked completely different compared to how the Metropolitan looks today. Like the Metropolitan will go on for blocks, you know, now. Like it goes from like 70-something to like 80-something street.
Wow.
It's huge.
It's a huge building. It's long, it's huge, it's tall.
I visited for 3 days and I still couldn't see it all.
Wow.
Yeah, like I usually get my highlights just like basically the Egyptian wing and the arms and armor exhibits. Though I personally prefer the Brooklyn Museum because it's my hometown museum.
I just love spending about almost an entire day in one area of that museum where it's like they took a chunk of an Egyptian tomb and moved the whole thing into one wing of the Metropolitan Museum.
Yeah, it's the Temple of Dendor.
That's it.
But like the museum, you know, back in 1900s, it's just opening up. Is this really small? Is a much smaller, like mansion-looking building. And years later, they just built on top of that, and on top of that, on top of that, into the modern, neoclassical building it is today. But yeah, it's really interesting. You have to go back and look at all the little details. Like Fifth Avenue back then, where, you know, up that side of Central Park, was all huge mansions of the, you know, wealthiest families of New York. And it's really funny because at the same time, it's also kind of sad because Central Park was at one point a very African American neighborhood called Seneca Village, and then they just bulldozed that completely to make Central Park. And then the city fathers decided to stiff the design team on that to the point where when Brooklyn asked them to do what became Prospect Park, Brooklyn had to promise complete creative control and on-time payment. Because you have to remember, until 1898, Brooklyn was still its own separate city. And then we were basically needed a better water supply, so we joined up with Manhattan and Queens and Staten Island and the Bronx.
Yeah, there's more money to be had once you incorporate to the rest of the city. It's like down here in Miami, we used to just have downtown Miami being just Miami. And then there was the Miami-Dade, and then they just decided to call all of Dade part of Miami. But we even had an area down here called Coconut Grove. That's what it's called today. But almost entirely scrubbed from history down here was back in the 1920s. It was called Colored Grove. That's where they would have that population located. But they decided, well, now it's starting to become more exclusive living towards the beach. So we got to move people out here. And that's when we had I-95 cutting right through the community. And this is pretty much just what happens to people that are financially not in the same position as the wealthy like J.P. Morgan.
And it happened here too in Brooklyn. In the 1930s or 40s, there's this guy who was basically the most powerful man in New York, Robert Moses, who technically was not an elected official, but he was like the head of parks and planning. But he was basically had all the power, and he wanted to build this whole new freeway, which was the BQE, the Brooklyn Queens Expressway. And in doing so, he bisected several African American communities and thus pretty much destroyed them to build that highway. He's a horrible man, but he ultimately ended up being a victim of his own success because he tried to first he pissed off all of Brooklyn, which by now is its own borough, because he refused to have the Dodgers build their new stadium. It was now the Atlantic Barclays Center complex, coincidentally. So that's why they moved to Los Angeles, earning the enmity of Brooklynites for all generations. And then he wanted to also tore down Old Penn Station, which was this monumental building. And if you've ever been to modern day Penn Station until they just built a new train hall just west of it, it's a toilet. I think that someone who uses Amtrak to get to cons, it's a toilet. Now the new train hall in the old post office though was very nice. And so he wanted to do the same to Grand Central. Huge protest led by Jackie O. That stopped it. And he said, let's tear down the Greenwich Village and build a whole bridge to New Jersey. That got stopped. That's now got turned into, I think, the Holland or Lincoln Tunnel. So ultimately, he lost a lot of power, finally, and he died basically a broken old man.
Yeah, it seems like back in the early 19-teens, 1920s. I was just watching a video the other day about in the 1920s, there were about 600, probably even double the amount, that died during a major flood when a dam broke, when a major developer just didn't want to bother with the fact that there were cracks at the bottom of the dam and flooded the entire town. You see this old man, this withered old rich asshole going, yeah, I guess I screwed up here, but hey, I'm rich. It's not like anything's going to happen to me. And nothing did.
It's because back then there was basically the Wild West, was very little regulation until probably Teddy Roosevelt's first laws of regulation, or even later with Truman and FDR, doing regulations. It's really depressing because if you go back to 1900, it's the age of sweatshops. It's the age of child labor. It is a miserable existence. I mean, issue 2, we have, if you can tell by the cover, we have a whole disaster involving a sweatshop. Inspired by and that's inspired by the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire Factory, which happened several years later, but similar idea. In fact, the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire Factory was, until 9/11, the worst loss of life in New York City until then.
Yeah, they would have women that would be inside of their jobs working these 12-hour shifts, kind of like working for Frito-Lay today, which, by the way, Everybody should be fucking not buying Frito-Lay until they fix their conditions. It's 7 days a week. And by the way, here is that cover, which I will be sharing right now. But it just shows that what was happening 100 years ago is happening today. Hey, you can read about Jim Crow laws, but why do that when you can live through them today?
Yep.
Real
shit.
And it was really, and so I took a little of that history that takes place several years after this, and there's a lot of women working there, a lot of immigrants working there, children working there. There's a little more positive ending to our version than ours, but still you have the tragedy of all the women and other immigrants literally flinging themselves out the window to escape the flames, even though they know they're gonna, end up a, splattered corpse at the end on the sidewalk, because it was that desperate. And like in the history, they got locked in by their asshole bosses, who really wanted to keep them productive while they go off and get a drink.
Yeah, as long as they fit in with the bottom line, they don't care what happens to their labor. The labor aren't even human beings. They're just ones and zeros on a piece of paper.
Pretty much. And there's a whole song on the show, Rags, which is different from Ragtime, because it's two shows, similar names. It's weird. But there's a song that I called Greenhorns, which is all about the immigration officials looking at the immigrants and saying, oh, here's all the people who's basically going to do all the work for us. And that keeps our engines going.
And all we needed was another pandemic, just like what happened back in 1919, happens again in 2020 to kind of reset the workforce a little bit. But really, right now is the time where if we wanted to get that 4-day work week, which is going to be difficult as hell, now's the time to fight for it, because it's when there's huge shakeups in a population that change can actually be affected.
Mm-hmm.
And there's, you go back to the historical characters in the book, you have Emma Goldman. She's like, you need to use these gifts to help people, and you shouldn't, and I'll use her word, prostitute himself to and just be cheap about it, and use it for things like he's a strong man. Like in issue 3, by the time he's in issue 3, he's a strong man in Houdini's act. And
it's like Spider-Man being a wrestler, power and responsibility. Yeah. You have these powers. What are you going to do with them?
Because the person yelling at you is one of the most infamous or famous organizers, protesters, union organizers, socialists, anarchists, feminists, free love specialists, nurses. She was a very complicated lady. In fact, when she heard that in 1901, when President McKinley got shot, and everyone's like, "Oh, all these anarchists did," and Emma Goldman must be the real influence. She's like, "I didn't do anything, but I will nurse him," even though I completely disagree with McKinley. That was turned down in jail. Really, I think she got expelled from the country for assumingly cooperating with the assassin. In fact, a lot of history notes that a lot of history says the assassin McKinley, Jogash, actually pissed off Goldman and her friends because they suspected he was such a radical. They said, "Okay, he's laying on a little too thick. Maybe he's a police spy." No, he's just that crazy.
All to fit a narrative.
Yeah, but there's a lot of great. But I think my favorite historical characters to write are two mages in a way. One of them doesn't even have magic powers, or does he? It's Harry Houdini, because he's just a fun to write. He's very positive. He's very clever. He's very slick, and he always has a little something up his sleeve, even when he's talking to you. Maybe not a trick, but maybe a bit of information or a little plan of his own that might help you.
He had panache.
Yes, the ultimate showman, so to speak. And on the other side, on the villains, you have Aleister Crowley, who's only a few years older than Liberty, Jake, and he's a completely nasty piece of work, but he's so fun to write because he's a little camp. He likes chewing the scenery of a bandit, and he's just
a ham.
He's a ham. He's a ham, and he knows it, and he's nasty as hell. But he's a delightfully hammy character to write and it still works perfectly with the characters because he may be hammy, but he still works in this universe of 1900 New York.
I mean, one of the best things that I always loved about Aleister Crowley was the way that he would just be able to capture ideas and realize that you can weaponize ideas. He could look at somebody from across the street, think about it just hard enough, and if he could make eye contact with the other person, he could just do one of these, and the person falls and trips and doesn't break their neck, but falls down on the street because it's just something that he wills into existence by ideas.
He's a chaos agent. He's essentially, in ways, a magical joker. He's an agent of.
He's a sociopath.
He really is, and
That's scary to think about.
our version is definitely a sociopath. The theory's out on the real life one, but he was also. Actually, he was a sociopath because there actually the chapter in history where he led a expedition to K2, and it was a disaster. And there was this landslide, and he literally walked down the mountain, taking the entire bankroll of the trip, past the survivors, and he had to get sued.
Yeah, he probably never intended. I don't think he ever intended to climb the K2. He just went, wait a second, there's a lot of money in there. It's kind of like when you're working at a casino, no one looks at the money box as it's coming into the casino, so you can launder money that way. It was all about showmanship with him too.
Yeah, he was a bit of a mountaineer, but at the same time, he was just a horrible human being.
He was a scam artist.
Basically. But also in issue 3, he also introduced Nellie Bly, the great journalist. As I said, it was the one who went into Blackwell's insane asylum, which is now, I'll go into that a bit. And she was the one who said, okay, let me pretend to be crazy, get locked up in the woman's ward, and let me report the conditions. The conditions are so bad, her publisher, who was Joseph Pulitzer, had to pull her out. And she posed an expedite 10 days in the madhouse, and that basically forced the city to do reforms. Was in the city insane asylum. Like you had two options if you were found insane in New York. If you were rich and wealthy, you probably ended up in Bellevue Hospital, which still exists. And they do have a small psychiatric wing, but it's still one of the biggest hospital complexes in the city. It's not one of the better hospitals. It is one of the better hospitals in the city. But if you were poor or a criminal, you would end up in Blackwell's Island Penitentiary or the insane asylum on Blackwell's Island, which is now Roosevelt Island. And what's really funny is the only remains of the insane asylum is this octagonal tower, and it's part of a condo complex now. Because New York.
Yeah. Hey, if you can charge a little more because of the unique architecture, who's not going to take up on that?
Yeah, there is one ruin of the hospitals that were on there because it also used to be called Welfare Island, and that's where they would have like the poor hospital, the smallpox hospital, the orphanages, things like that, where the pensioners. And there's one ruin left, and it's the smallpox hospital, but it's so in bad condition that they're really propping it up, trying to raise the money, propping up with like steel beams so it doesn't like utterly collapse on someone walking by. And also interesting to look at because I wrote a prologue for this. Jake and his family would have arrived in New York in around 1886, around the time the Statue of Liberty was being completed. Ellis Island doesn't even exist in 1886. I had to look this up. And that is where we would have gone then. It was a place called Castle Garden or Castle Clinton, named after DeWitt Clinton, the former governor of New York. And they would have been processed there. And actually, is a word in Yiddish called Kesselgarten, which means a incoherent babble, which is essentially named after Castle Garden. What is Castle Garden now is where you get the tickets for the Statue of Liberty in Ellis Island. And it's actually tourist trip. That's the only official place you can get the tickets there. Don't get it from like a random person on the street in like Bowling Green or Battery Park. Just go to that one thing. You'll be on a line forever, but that's the only way you can get the tickets.
The last time I was in New York City was in 2007, where I got to, unfortunately, propose to my first wife. And before that, back in 2011 and back in 2001. Well, time. In 2001, later towards the end of the year, you weren't able to go to visit the Statue of Liberty for such a period of time. I was only able to look at it from the park. That was about the most I could get to it.
The creepy thing about it was I was actually at a birthday party in Battery Park City, And we were actually in the shadow of the World Trade Center trying to find a cab, and 2 weeks later.
Wow. Yeah. Well,
That's scary.
one hell of a day.
Yeah.
I just remember the silence, and I don't want to end the show talking about that issue.
Next question.
So, I have a question I like to ask a lot of people, and we both share a fondness for Mr. Kirby, the King. Jack has a very famous story where he would say he told people comics will break your heart, kid.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me, if comics broke your heart.
A couple. I just had trouble. Well, now I'm officially self-publishing, but I've had a couple bad luck with publishers. I mean, my first publisher got the book funded, but he wasn't doing much to get the book out. So I moved to Short Fuse, and Short Fuse, just recently fell apart. So that's my broken heart story at the moment.
But you're still making comics. You're still excited to make them, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love writing them. I love creating them. I love having them be in my hands.
Yeah, that's true, Grant. They will, especially if you eat them with hot sauce.
I mean, even Eric Powell working on his early versions of the Goon, his early publishers, he had to bounce from publisher to publisher to publisher before he just started going like, "Fuck it, I'm doing it on my own."
Yep.
Right. Well, if it breaks your heart and you keep making them, then you're the right person to be making comics, and that's one of the things that I think I've learned over the years, that so many of the greats have been crushed time and time again. They just got to back up, brush themselves off, and kept on making fucking comics. And if you can keep doing it, if you can persevere through that, that's what you got to do to make comics.
Yep.
So
I agree.
So we're coming up to almost an hour. Is there any appearances that you might be making for the remainder of the year? We're about halfway through the year now. There's MegaCon. There's all different types of conventions coming up. Are you appearing anywhere?
Well, I was supposed to go to Fan Expo Boston, except they changed the dates to September. And it's just around Rosh Hashanah, so I can't go.
That's a shame.
Also because I also had friends planning to come to help me, and then there were ones in the UK, and that led to a whole bunch of chaos because the US-UK air path is still closed. So I had to cancel that. But I'm going to be at New York Comic Con, but I just, as a pro badge, I don't have a table or anything. So my first real return to a convention will be Baltimore Comic Con in October.
Very
Baltimore
cool.
Comic Con. And down below are all the social medias that you can find Daniel Kalban. Over on Twitter is @DanielKalban. On Instagram, DKalban. On Facebook is Daniel.Kalban. Also, you can find this in the description of the title of the show. And down below is Philip's website over on Facebook.
Phillips.
Philip. Who's Philip? Philip's last week. Damn it.
Yeah, she's saying to me, you guys were talking about how I was going to be on the show this Sunday. He's like, you guys were excited. And he's like, this is really cool and excited. And he said, oh, you're going to be on Wednesday. I'm like, Wednesday?
Yeah, so to let the audience know, about 40 minutes prior to broadcast, I was working on doing all the different, all the things that you see below here. So we start getting to talk, and Daniel's a pretty awesome guy. So, of course, I forget to make a lot of the little typo corrections. All my fault. I make it. It's all
that's just completely coincidental.
Well, it happens to the best of us. Everybody makes mistakes.
Exactly.
My last name's worst. It's not like I'm going to try and push it off on Kirk. It's all you. Your fault.
Well,
my last name is Nervous. It's not going to work for me.
No,
really. My last name's Nervous.
So is there anything that you want the audience to know? You get the last word. Daniel, throwing it over to you.
We can't really do these comics without your support, so any support you can give for this Kickstarter will be greatly appreciated. We have a whole bunch of options of rewards for you, including digital-only options, covers. We have the main cover, the variant cover. We have a couple other cool options, such as cameo appearances starting in issue 7. We have a consultation with me, and any support you guys give is greatly appreciated because this helps me make the next issue and the next issue and the next issue and the next issue.
So make sure that you check out that Kickstarter. It is in the description within. So those that are the replay viewers, hopefully you get a chance to take a look at that. There's 23 days remaining. As of July the 11th, it is 3/5 funded, but there's still a couple weeks. So do make sure to check out that link. Otherwise, we'll be back not next, but this coming Wednesday. That is what, the 12th, 13th, 14th, I believe that's what, the 15th, July?
14th.
14th.
No, it's like the 14th. Yeah.
14th. I confuse everybody. But one thing not to be confused about, it just broke in the news earlier today. Artist Robeson Rocha, artist of Green Lanterns, Justice League, Supergirl. Today it was just announced on his Twitter through family that he had passed from COVID. So keep him in your thoughts and prayers, and visit his social medias perhaps to try and donate there as well. Otherwise, that's been our show this evening tonight. Do check out Mr. Daniel Kalban on the social medias, and we will be back this coming Wednesday. I don't think we have a guest, but we have new comic books to show. So see you then, everybody.
Oh, yeah. Have a good night, everybody.
Night, everyone.
Don't die, anybody. I do mean that. Don't die.
Rule number 1.
Rule number 1. And don't forget, Black Lives Matter, trans rights, and Helen fucking Mirren, because Ace needs to fuck Helen Mirren.
Thanks for tuning in. If you want to see this episode again, along with a catalog of back episodes and issues, surf on over to Not Near Mint on YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram. Subscribe and hit that bell for notifications. Rob Wurst, Lady Fantastic, Miracle Man, and Comics on the Mind will be back next week. Same time, Wednesday, 10 p.m. Eastern Time on Not Near Mint.